Hello and welcome to Penguin TV. It is recorded by George Ephelis, aka Whiffy Penguin, and you can follow me on Twitter at Whiffy Penguin. Penguin TV is hosted by PureMTGO.com and sponsored by MTGOTraders.com. Get an 8% discount off all orders over $50 when paying with PayPal or credit card. And you can check out KeepYourGames.com and get an extra 20% off when trading paper for digital. Enjoy the videos. Hey there everybody, this is a deck tech for blue-white Tron in Modern. This is not the exact list that goes along with the corresponding footage of a daily event. I built this list up, tweaked it a little bit based on a new article by Jerry T, the evolution of Tron in, I guess, Magic. Because it goes way back. But at any rate, I had a condemn over a Ghost Quarter, and that's the difference in between this deck and what you'll see in rounds 1 through 4 of the videos. So we've got blue-white Tron, and the Tron are the Urza lands. Anyone who does not understand why it's called Tron, the reason is for a late 70s, early 80s cartoon called Voltron, where a bunch of lions, robot lions in outer space, would join together and make a giant robot to fight giant space monsters. Later on, I believe that they changed the lions to cars, but yeah, no, it's all about the lions for Tron. So that's why it's Tron, because once you get one of each, you produce 2 or 3 mana per land. One of each Tron piece creates 7 mana out of 3 lands, which is not too bad. Although, there are 12 colorless lands in your deck, in your blue-white control deck. This is actually more of a blue-white combo deck, though. So, in order to make the Urza lands work, in my humble opinion, you need signets. I don't believe that the archetype can work without signets. Maybe you could build a tooth and nail deck as a monocolored Urzatron deck without signets, but I think that if you want to play more than one color, you absolutely need signets. You won't always get the straight Urza draw, and when you don't, you have colored mana to pay for your spells. But when you do get the all Urzatron hand, even if you suit up on turn 3, if you don't have any white or blue mana, what are you doing? You're playing Expedition Map, and that's it. So, the signets are very important. If we go over here, we see our lands. We've got a pair of Seachrome Coasts, and we've got 4 Celestial Colonnades. A lot of our colored mana comes into play tapped, but that's okay, because we do some ridiculous things once we've got colored mana. Mostly because we have a ton of mana, thanks to the Tron pieces. We've got a basic Plains and a basic Island, because Ghost Quarter is a real card, and you don't want to just have 0 value out of a Ghost Quarter. We also have a pair of Hallowed Fountains and a Misty Rainforest, and then we've got this Watery Grave here. And the Watery Grave is so that we can hardcast an Unburial Rites. After, playing this deck archetype roughly 20 or 30 matches, I was comfortable with adding a Watery Grave. I don't think the fact that it does not add white mana is that big of a deal. And I don't think it's that big of a deal that we're playing a Misty Rainforest instead of another fetch land that would get a Plains, like a Sacred Foundry or something, because then we can still get our Hallowed Fountains, and now we can still get our Watery Grave. And it doesn't come up very often, but just the fact, it's just a little bit of extra added value with minimal cost. We've got a Ghost Quarter, and that is primarily for the mirror. I suppose there are some corner cases where I might want to Ghost Quarter one of my own lands, or a man land, or whatnot, but it's primarily to break up another player's Tron. And the last land, which isn't a mana source, but a tutor, is the Eye of Ugin, which will fetch our 2 Eldrazi's and a sideboard Wormcoil Engine out of our deck. So we've got all this mana, and we've got 4 expedition maps to make sure that we can get our third piece in a relatively early fashion. If you open on 1 Tron piece and 2 maps, it's gonna take you a couple of turns to get there, but expedition map is very good. It helps you get these guys. It helps you get your Eye of Ugin once you're already Troned up. In some matchups, it's correct to get Celestial Colonnade or Ghost Quarter. It's a very good tutor. Then we get to the signets, which, as I said earlier, are just super important, and there is an extra Talisman of Progress. If you could play 5 Azorius signets, you would. The fact that all the other signets don't produce the 2 colors your deck needs, I think is a little bit of a downfall. I feel like white mana is more important than blue mana when you're trying to stabilize, and Azorius Signet is something you would do to stabilize as well as accelerate. And then we get to our tempo/dig cards. You're playing a lot of colorless lands, your deck is slow, so you need to be able to, find all of your pieces and then start going over the top of their things. Remand is perfect for that. You can often play it on turn 2 to time walk them and draw an extra card. Sometimes you play your Signet and you remand on turn 3 or 4. Sometimes you use remand just to, stop their combo and then you win the next turn. But unlike a lot of the other decks that are running things like Mana Leak or Spell Pierce, we don't care about the card eventually resolving. We just want to keep them off tempo for a few turns while we make our big endgame happen. Thirst for Knowledge often discards 2 cards. Unless it's late in the game, you're not going to be throwing away a Signet or an Expedition map, but it does let you dig and filter your hand. Say you've got a bunch of man lands or dual lands of any kind in your hand, and all you need is just 1 more Tron piece. Thirsting, I would discard all 3 cards if I could thirst into a Tron piece every time. The missing Tron piece every time. We've got a Repeal, which, when you've got buckets of mana, can return anything. But really, it plays the same role as Remand. Repeal their 1-drop. Repeal their, 0-drop if it won't fizzle the repeal. You just want to draw a card and keep them just a touch off tempo. And then you've got a Condescend, which I've played with it, I've played without it. I like having it. I wouldn't be opposed to cutting it again, though. The Scry 2 is pretty important when you're digging. And this deck does dig very well. Look at all this dig. And then it tutors as well. Then we've got some cards that, interact with the opponent's board. Timely Reinforcements. I don't like the card. I tend to side it out in almost every matchup. But the matchups where it's good, I'm not really sure if you can win the game without casting it sometimes. Boros, sometimes Jund just gets you. This Timely Reinforcements, unfortunately, by the nature of our deck, is kind of important. We've got 4 Paths, which is close to Swords to Plowshares. I'd much rather have Swords to Plowshares. Giving them a land, and everyone plays basic land, giving them a land on turn 1 or turn 2 is rough. But sometimes you just cannot let a Dark Confidant keep going. And then you've got an Oblivion Ring. And a large reason for a lot of these one-ofs is the Gifts Ungiven package. Now, primarily, you're going to be gifting Gifts Ungivening for an Unburial Rites and either an Elesh Norn or an Iona Shield of Emeria. You can actually search up 0 cards. It doesn't matter how many cards you search up with Gifts Ungiven. You can go for 0, or you can go for 1, 2, 3, or 4. The important thing to note is that your opponent has to put 2 cards in the graveyard. So if you only get 1 card, that 1 card goes to the graveyard. If you only get 2 cards, both of them go to the graveyard. So you would cast a Gifts Ungiven, you would pick the monster that is better suited to the game state, and an Unburial Rites. And then for an extra 4 mana, you flash back the Unburial Rites on the monster. That's a good game. I'm not saying good game as in the game's over, but it is a good game to pay 8 mana broken up over 2 turns, if you'd like, to play this. The nut draw on this deck is turn 1 Tron, turn 2 Tron Signet, turn 3 Tron, 8 mana, Gifts Ungiven, Unburial Rites. That's the nut draw, which doesn't happen often, but is pretty sweet when you get it to go off. Gifts Ungiven also is a pretty good utility package. Let's say there's something you absolutely need to get rid of. You grab an Oblivion Ring, a Path to Exile, a Repeal, and then if I were in the situation, I would probably grab either Remand or Condescend. Chances are they're going to give you the Repeal and bin the 2 white cards. So repealing it doesn't do much, but repealing it and counterspelling it again while digging seems better. There's also the Gifts Ungiven for just pure value package, where you grab a Thirst for Knowledge, a Gifts Ungiven, a Remand, and then either a Repeal or an Expedition map. This pile just ensures that you get to see a couple extra cards. Another pretty not average, but a pile that you'll be making a lot of the times is when you're digging for a missing piece. So let's say you need the Power Plant. You would grab Power Plant, Expedition map, Gifts Ungiven, and probably Thirst for Knowledge. Now, if they straight up lose to you assembling Tron, you'll get the Gifts Ungiven and Thirst for Knowledge. And you can go for it again the next turn with a Power Plant, Expedition map, and then depending on what's going on the board state, you've already got a lot of cards that draw you cards in your hand. The second time you might go for a Path to Exile, and either an Oblivion Ring or a Repeal, or maybe the Timely Reinforcements. If you're well ahead on board and you've got a Watery Grave, I've done this a few times. I've got the Watery Grave in my hand. I will Gifts Ungiven for a Thirst for Knowledge and then all 3 of these cards. Chances are they'll give me the Thirst for Knowledge, or chances are they'll give me the Unburial Rites and the harder to cast Fatty. Let's say I only have like 1 white mana, they would probably give me Iona and bin the Elish Norn and the Thirst for Knowledge. Now I play the Watery Grave and Unburial Rites whichever Fatty they put in my graveyard. So yeah, that's about as quick of a course on Gifts Ungiven as I can give pertaining to this particular deck. There are so many permutation of piles that you can get, and this is one of the hardest cards to play with, in my opinion, in Magic, and I am by no means great at it. When you're not, tutoring all crazy, sometimes you just get like 14 mana, and that's when you go and grab Eye of Ugin to get these awesome Eldrazi's. Sometimes you can't resolve things. Like, let's say you're playing against Esper Control or some other heavy control deck. If that's the way that the game is going to go, which most control decks do, where you just make land drops and stare at each other, eventually Emrakul trumps every deck. There are very few decks that you don't want this in. Mostly those are decks that are bad matchups, and you're probably going to lose the game by turn 6 anyway. So, yeah, that is an overview of Tron. At least some of the applications to the cards that are in the deck. If we look at the sideboard, this is the most current sideboard, and it tries to address a bunch of different archetypes that you'll commonly see in the modern queues. To start off with, we've got Dispel, which is mostly for either Twin or Storm or possibly Control decks. You might side it in against Tron and the Mirror to hit their Gifts Ungivens. We've got Mindbreak Trap, which is, again, best suited for Storm, but also a pretty good sideboard for the Tron Mirror, because Mindbreak Trap, unlike every other counter spell in the format, actually stops Emrakul. And it actually exiles it as well, so it's not coming back. This trumps the Emrakul and the... what's it called? Ulamog out of the Mirror. Speaking of the Mirror, we've got Terastodon, which you Gifts Ungiven for, and Unburial Rites blow up their 3 Tron lands. Boom. You're way ahead, and it doesn't matter that they have 9 power, because you can block each one of them. Speaking for the Mirror, Disenchant's a pretty good one to disrupt their stones. And then for aggro decks, as well, this one's also for combo, but this one falls into aggro and combo. Celestial Purge is good for getting rid of one of the twin combo enablers. It's also good for getting rid of Bloodbraid Elf or Liliana or any awesome red or black card that's just going to give you problems. Wormcoil Engine and Timely Reinforcements. You need these against the aggro decks, the decks that are trying to win the game on turn 4 or 5. Zoo, Jund, Boros, red deck wins. The life gain is immense, but having the bodies is also pretty important to block with while you set up your endgame. And then we've got this pile here, which is almost most of my... This is my Malira pod sideboard for the most part. We've got Grafdigger's Cage, which just shuts down the entire deck. It turns into a kind of like a mid-range aggro deck while you've got Grafdigger's Cage down. And if there's one thing that Tron is good at, it is beating mid-range decks. Torpor Orb, this comes in for Twin as well, but primarily, again, it's for stopping Malirapod. The fact that it also hits Twin is great, because Twin's not one of the best matchups for this deck. We've got 2 Relic of Progenitus, which has, if nothing else, the application of just being a 1-mana cantrip, or a 2-mana cantrip, I suppose. A common misconception is that, Blue-White Tron relies heavily on its graveyard, and it really doesn't. So blowing your own relics, even if you have tutor targets in your graveyard, not that big a deal. And I love seeing people side this in against me. Pithing Needle, hitting Viscera Seer or Pod is really good in the Pod matchup. It's also really good against Tectonic Edge and Ghost Quarter, which see very little play, to be honest. But the few people who are prepared for Tron, I like to have these Pithing Needles there. Pithing Needle is just a versatile card in general. There might be some card I've never thought of since it was last in Standard or Block or Draft that, Pithing Needle just stops. So it's a good card to have in your sideboard. I'm a big fan. This is by no means a definitive Blue-White Tron list. This is just the list that I've been running recently, or a very close permutation. And I will be playing it in another daily event for the article. I don't know if it will be recorded, though. But until then, enjoy the rounds that I recorded before this deck tech. I'll see you guys next time.